The winter of 1867 was one of the cruelest anyone could remember on the Texas frontier. Snow piled up against wagon wheels, and the wind cut through clothing like a sharp knife. For 15-year-old Mary Catherine Sullivan, this winter would change everything she thought she knew about survival and human nature. Just 3 weeks earlier, Mary Catherine had been traveling west with her parents in a covered wagon, dreaming of the new life they would build together. Her father, Patrick, was a carpenter who believed he could make good money building homes for settlers in the growing towns. Her mother, Rose, carried their life savings sewn into the lining of her winter coat, enough money to buy land and start fresh. But dreams can die faster than hope in a blizzard. The sickness started with her father. One morning he woke up burning with fever, his skin hot to the touch. Within hours he was too weak to drive the wagon. Rose took the reins while Mary Catherine held wet cloths to her father's forehead, watching helplessly as he grew weaker by the hour. "It's just a cold," Rose kept saying, but her voice shook with worry. "He'll be better tomorrow." Tomorrow never came for Patrick Sullivan. He died quietly in the back of their wagon on a Tuesday morning, with snow falling softly on the canvas cover above them. Mary Catherine had never seen her mother cry like that. Deep, silent sobs that seemed to come from somewhere far inside her chest. They buried Patrick beside the trail, marking his grave with stones because the ground was too frozen to dig deep. Rose said a prayer while Mary Catherine stood shivering in the cold, wondering what would happen to them now. The answer came sooner than she expected. 2 days after the funeral, Rose started coughing. At first, it was just a small cough that she tried to hide behind her hand. But by evening, she was burning with the same fever that had taken Patrick. "Listen to me carefully," Rose whispered to her daughter that night, pressing her mother's wedding ring into Mary Catherine's palm. "If something happens to me, you take this ring and you find good people to help you. There are kind folks out there, even in hard times like these." Mary Catherine wanted to argue, to tell her mother that nothing would happen, that they would be fine. But she could see the truth in her mother's fevered eyes. The same sickness that killed her father was now taking her mother too. Rose Sullivan died 3 days later, calling out for Patrick in her final moments. Mary Catherine sat alone in the wagon, holding her mother's cold hand and listening to the wind howl across the empty prairie. She was 15 years old, completely alone, with nothing but the clothes on her back and her mother's wedding ring hidden in a small leather pouch around her neck. The wagon train leader, a stern man named Thompson, found her there the next morning. He stood at the back of the wagon, looking uncomfortable as he delivered news that would make Mary Catherine's situation even worse. "I'm sorry for your loss, girl," he said, not meeting her eyes. "But we can't take you with us anymore. We've got our own families to worry about, and winter's getting worse. You'll have to make your own way from here." Mary Catherine stared at him in disbelief. "But where will I go? I don't have anywhere else." Thompson shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "There's a settlement about 5 miles north of here. Maybe someone there will take pity on you. We'll give you enough food for a few days, but that's all we can spare." And just like that, Mary Catherine found herself standing beside the trail, watching the wagon train disappear into the swirling snow. They left her with a small bag of dried meat, some hard biscuits, and a thin blanket that wouldn't keep a cat warm in weather like this. She had 2 choices: sit down in the snow and wait to die, or start walking toward the settlement Thompson had mentioned. The choice was easy, even if the walking wasn't. The settlement turned out to be nothing more than 6 small buildings huddled together against the wind. There was a general store, a blacksmith shop, a small church, and 3 houses. That looked like they'd seen better days. Smoke rose from most of the chimneys, which gave Mary Catherine hope that she might find warmth and kindness inside. She was wrong about the kindness part. The first door she knocked on belonged to the storekeeper's wife, a thin woman with sharp eyes who looked Mary Catherine up and down like she was measuring her for a coffin. "We don't take in strays," the woman said before Mary Catherine could even explain her situation. "Times are hard enough without feeding extra mouths." The door slammed shut so hard it rattled the windows. The next house belonged to the blacksmith. He was kinder than his neighbor, at least listening to Mary Catherine's story before shaking his head sadly. "I wish I could help you, child," he said. "But my wife is expecting our 5th baby any day now, and we barely have enough food for the ones we already got. Maybe try the church. Sometimes the preacher takes in folks who need help." But the church was locked tight, and nobody answered when Mary Catherine knocked on the door of the small house beside it. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped even further, she began to wonder if she would freeze to death. Before morning, that's when she saw the light flickering in the window of the last house on the edge of the settlement. It was smaller than the others, with gaps between the wooden boards where the wind whistled through. But light meant people, and people might mean hope. Mary Catherine knocked on the door with numb fingers, so cold she could barely feel her own hands. When the door opened, she found herself looking up at a tall, thin man with gray hair and cold blue eyes. "What do you want?" he asked, looking her over the same way the storekeeper's wife had. "Please, sir," Mary Catherine managed through chattering teeth. "My parents died and I need somewhere to stay. I can work for my food. I'm good at cooking and cleaning, and I don't eat much." The man studied her for a long moment. Behind him, Mary Catherine could see a woman sitting by the fire and a younger man sharpening something with a metal file. "Ezra," the woman called from her chair, "close that door before all the heat gets out." Ezra Blackwood, though Mary Catherine didn't know his name yet, looked at her one more time. "You say you can work?" "Yes, sir. I'll work hard, I promise." "And you got nowhere else to go?" Mary Catherine shook her head, hope rising in her chest. Ezra stepped back and opened the door wider. "Well then, I suppose we could use an extra pair of hands around here. Come in before you freeze to death on my doorstep." Mary Catherine stepped into the warm cabin, grateful beyond words. She had no way of knowing that her desperate search for help had just led her into the hands of people far more dangerous than the winter cold she was trying to escape. The woman by the fire was Minerva Blackwood, Ezra's wife. She had gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to look right through a person. The younger man was their son Caleb, who appeared to be in his 20s with strong hands and a quiet way of moving that reminded Mary Catherine of a cat stalking a mouse. "What's your name, girl?" Minerva asked without looking up from her sewing. "Mary Catherine Sullivan, ma'am." "Well, Mary Catherine Sullivan, if you're going to stay here, you'll earn your keep. We'll give you a place to sleep in the barn and enough food to keep you alive, but you'll work from sunup to sundown." "Understood?" Mary Catherine nodded eagerly. A place to sleep and food to eat sounded like heaven after the past few days. "Yes, ma'am, thank you so much for your kindness." Caleb made a sound that might have been a laugh, but when Mary Catherine looked at him, his face showed nothing at all. That night, as she settled into a pile of hay in the barn with a thin blanket pulled up to her chin, Mary Catherine felt grateful for the first time since her parents had died. She had found shelter from the storm, and people who were willing to help her survive the winter, she had no idea that she had. Just walked into a trap that might cost her everything. The first week at the Blackwood homestead felt like a blessing to Mary Catherine. She woke up each morning in the barn, grateful to have a roof over her head and the promise of at least one meal a day. The work was hard, but she had expected that. What she hadn't expected was the strange feeling that seemed to follow her everywhere she went. It started with small things that didn't quite make sense on her third day there. Mary Catherine was feeding the chickens when she noticed something odd in the dirt near the chicken coop. It was a small piece of blue fabric, the kind that might come from a woman's dress. But it was torn and dirty, like it had been there for months. When she asked Minerva about it, the older woman's face went pale. "Don't go poking around where you don't belong," Minerva snapped, snatching the fabric from Mary Catherine's hand. "There's plenty of work to keep you busy without you nosing around in things that don't concern you." Mary Catherine apologized quickly, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Minerva's reaction was too strong for such a small question. The meals were another strange thing. Every day, Minerva would set out 4 plates on the table, then quickly put one away before the family sat down to eat. When Mary Catherine asked if she should join them, Ezra just grunted and pointed toward the kitchen corner where a small bowl waited for her. "You eat there," he said. "Family table is for family." But if there were only 3 family members, why did Minerva always set out 4 plates first? The work itself was exhausting. Mary Catherine milked the cow every morning before dawn, fed all the animals, gathered eggs, chopped wood for the fire, washed clothes in the freezing creek, and helped Minerva with cooking and cleaning. Her hands became raw and cracked from the cold water and rough work, but she didn't complain. These people had saved her life, and she owed them everything, or so she thought. It was during her second week that Mary Catherine began to notice the sounds at night. She slept in the barn loft, where the hay provided some warmth and the walls blocked most of the wind. But sound traveled easily through the thin wooden walls, especially when the house was quiet. She would hear voices coming from the main house late at night, not just talking, but arguing in hushed, urgent tones. Sometimes she could make out words like, "too risky," and "what if someone comes looking, and we can't keep doing this?" The conversations always stopped abruptly if she made any noise, like turning over in her sleep or coughing. One night she heard something that made her blood run cold. Caleb was talking to his parents about the man with the gold watch and how they should have buried him deeper. Mary Catherine pressed her ear against the wall, but the voices dropped so low she couldn't make out any more words. The next morning, she watched the family carefully during breakfast. They seemed normal enough. Ezra reading an old newspaper, Minerva stirring porridge, Caleb sharpening his knife like he did every morning. But there was something in their eyes when they looked at each other, a kind of silent communication that made Mary Catherine's stomach twist with unease. The discovery that changed everything happened during her 3rd week at the homestead. Mary Catherine was cleaning out the barn when she noticed that one of the floorboards in the back corner was loose. At first she thought she should tell Ezra about it. A loose board could be dangerous for the animals. But when she knelt down to examine it more closely, she realized it wasn't just loose. It had been deliberately pried up and then placed back down. She looked around to make sure no one was watching, then carefully lifted the board. What she found underneath made her heart stop. There was a small space hollowed out beneath the floorboards, and it was filled with things that clearly didn't belong to the Blackwood family. A man's gold pocket watch with initials carved on the back. A woman's silver brooch with tiny pearls around the edge. A pair of expensive-looking leather gloves, too small to belong to any of the men in the house. A child's wooden toy horse, painted bright red but now faded and chipped. Mary Catherine's hands shook as she picked up each item. These were personal belongings, the kind of things people carried with them on long journeys. The kind of things her own mother had packed carefully in their wagon before they started their trip west. But why were they hidden under the floorboards? And where were the people who owned them? She heard footsteps outside the barn and quickly put everything back, replacing the loose board just as Minerva appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing back there?" Minerva asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Just cleaning, ma'am," Mary Catherine replied, hoping her voice sounded normal. This corner had a lot of old hay and dirt in it. Minerva stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Well, finish up quickly. I need help with the washing." That afternoon, while helping Minerva scrub clothes by the creek, Mary Catherine couldn't stop thinking about what she had found. She tried to convince herself that there was an innocent explanation. Maybe the Blackwoods had bought those things from other travelers. Maybe they were saving them for special occasions, but deep in her heart, she knew something was terribly wrong. Her suspicions grew stronger over the next few days as she paid closer attention to the family's behavior. She noticed that Ezra and Caleb often went out together in the evenings, claiming they were checking on the animals or fixing fences. But they always came back with dirt on their clothes and a strange smell that reminded Mary Catherine of freshly turned earth. She also realized that the Blackwoods asked her a lot of questions about her past, not in a friendly way, but like they were trying to find out if anyone might come looking for her. They wanted to know if she had any relatives, any friends who knew where she had gone, anyone who might wonder what happened to her. "It's just so we know how to help you," Minerva would say with a smile that never reached her eyes. We want to make sure you don't have family somewhere worrying about you." But Mary Catherine began to suspect they wanted to know for a very different reason. The breaking point came on a cold Thursday morning when Mary Catherine was sweeping the front porch. She had gotten into the habit of working quietly so she could listen to conversations inside the house. Most of the time, the family just talked about normal things, the weather, the animals, what they needed from town, but this morning was different. "She's been here 3 weeks now," she heard Ezra say. "That's longer than we usually wait." "No," Minerva replied, "but she's useful. And she doesn't eat much." "Useful or not," Caleb's voice joined the conversation, "we can't keep her forever. What if someone comes looking for her?" "Nobody's coming," Ezra said with certainty. "She told us herself, no family, no friends, nobody even knows she exists. The wagon train people think she's already dead." There was a long pause, then Minerva spoke again. "Well, if we're going to do something, we better decide soon. Winter won't last forever, and once spring comes, we'll have more travelers passing through." Mary Catherine's blood turned to ice. The way they were talking about her, like she was a problem to be solved, not a person they were helping. And, the mention of travelers passing through made her think again about the hidden belongings under the barn floor. She forced herself to keep sweeping, to act normal, even though her heart was pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it inside. The house. When Minerva called her in for the midday meal, Mary Catherine walked through the door with a smile on her face, pretending she hadn't heard anything. But that night, lying in the barn loft with her thin blanket pulled up to her chin, Mary Catherine finally admitted the truth to herself. The Blackwoods weren't the kind people who had saved her life. They were something much more dangerous, and she was running out of time to figure out what to do about it. The sound of voices from the house drifted across the yard, too quiet for her to make out words, but urgent enough to keep her awake. She clutched her mother's wedding ring through the fabric of her dress and tried to think of a way to escape, but where could she go? It was still winter, she had no money, no horse, and the nearest town was 20 miles away through dangerous country. Even if she could survive the journey, who would believe her story about the respected Blackwood family? As she lay there in the darkness, Mary Catherine realized that her desperate search for help might have led her into a trap far worse than freezing to death in the snow dot, and tomorrow she would have to pretend everything was normal while she figured out how to stay alive. Mary Catherine woke up on Friday morning with a terrible feeling in her stomach. She had barely slept, tossing and turning in the hay while her mind raced with everything she had overheard the day before. The way the Blackwoods had talked about her like she was a problem they needed to solve made her skin crawl with fear. She tried to act normal as she went about her morning chores. Feed the chickens, milk the cow, gather eggs, chop wood for the fire. But her hands shook as she worked, and she kept glancing toward the house, wondering what the family was planning. The answer came sooner than she expected, around mid-morning. While Mary Catherine was hanging wet clothes on the line behind the house, Ezra walked over to her with a smile she had never seen before. It was supposed to look friendly, but something about it made her think of a wolf showing its teeth. "Mary Catherine," he said in a voice that was too cheerful, "we've been talking, and we've decided it's time to find you a proper place to live." Her heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, sir?" "Well, you can't stay here forever," Ezra continued, still wearing that strange smile. "Winter's almost over, and you're a young woman who needs to think about her future. We know a family in town who might be willing to take you in. Good Christian people who could give you the kind of life you deserve." Mary Catherine stared at him, trying to read the truth behind his words. After everything she had heard and seen, she knew there was no family in town waiting to help her. But she also knew that showing her suspicion might be the worst mistake she could make. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Blackwood," she said carefully. "When would we go to town?" "Tomorrow morning," Ezra replied. "We'll get you all cleaned up and take you to meet them. I think you'll like them very much." The way he said "like them very much" made Mary Catherine's blood run cold. She nodded and smiled, pretending to be grateful. But inside she was screaming with fear. That afternoon, while Minerva was napping and Ezra was working outside, Mary Catherine found herself alone in the house with Caleb. He was sitting at the kitchen table, running a sharpening stone along the edge of his hunting knife. The scraping sound filled the quiet room like fingernails on a board. "You excited about going to town tomorrow?" Caleb asked without looking up from his knife. "Yes," Mary Catherine lied. "It'll be nice to meet new people." Caleb made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Oh, you'll meet them all right." He held up the knife, examining the blade in the light from the window. "This is sharp enough to cut through just about anything now." The way he looked at her when he said those words made Mary Catherine's knees go weak. She mumbled something about needing to check on the animals and hurried outside, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. That evening at supper, the family's behavior was different than usual. They were almost cheerful, talking and laughing like they were celebrating something special. Minerva even gave Mary Catherine an extra piece of bread with her thin soup. "Eat up," Minerva said with false kindness. "You'll need your strength for tomorrow's journey." Mary Catherine forced herself to eat, even though the food tasted like sawdust in her mouth. She noticed that Ezra and Caleb kept exchanging glances across the table, like they were sharing a private joke that only they understood. After supper, while Mary Catherine was washing the dishes, she heard Minerva talking to her husband in the next room. "Remember to make it look right," Minerva was saying in a low voice. "People in town know we've been helping her, so if anyone asks questions later, we need our story to make sense." "Don't worry," Ezra replied. "We'll say we were taking her to meet that family, but we got attacked on the way. By the time we fought them off and got help, it was too late to save her. Very sad, very tragic. And make sure you get that ring she wears around her neck," Minerva added. "No point in leaving good jewelry behind." Mary Catherine's hand flew to her throat, where her mother's wedding ring hung on a thin chain beneath her dress. They had noticed it. They had been watching her closely enough to see the small bulge it made under her clothes. She finished the dishes as quietly as possible, then went out to the barn for what she knew might be her last night alive. As she climbed up to the loft, her mind was racing with desperate plans. She could try to run away in the middle of the night, but where would she go? It was still winter, she had no horse, and the nearest town was 20 miles away through dangerous country. She could try to defend herself. But what chance did a 15-year-old girl have against two grown men with weapons? She could try to convince them that someone would come looking for her, but she had already told them she had no family or friends. They knew nobody cared about one orphan girl who had disappeared during a harsh winter dot. As she lay in the hay, staring up at the barn roof, Mary Catherine heard the family talking in the house again. Their voices carried clearly through the still night air. "How far out should we take her?" Caleb was asking. "Far enough that nobody will find her for a long time," Ezra answered. "Maybe never, if we're lucky. There's that creek about 10 miles. North of here, the one with all the thick brush around it. Good place for an ambush. What if she tries to run?" "She won't get far. Besides, where's she going to go? She doesn't know this country, and she's just a scared little girl." Mary Catherine pressed her face into the hay to muffle her sobs. They were talking about killing her like it was no different from slaughtering a chicken for dinner. Like her life meant nothing at all, but as she cried, something else began to grow inside her chest. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was anger. These people had pretended to help her when she was desperate and alone. They had taken advantage of her gratitude and trust. They had watched her work herself to exhaustion for weeks, all while planning to murder her. She thought about her parents, buried beside the trail so far from home. She thought about all the other travelers whose belongings were hidden under the barn floor. How many people had trusted the Blackwoods? How many had died because they believed these monsters were good Christian folk? Mary Catherine wiped her tears and sat up in the hay. She might die tomorrow, but she wasn't going to make it easy for them. And if she somehow survived, she would make sure the world knew what kind of people the Blackwoods really were. She spent the rest of the night planning. If they were going to take her somewhere isolated to kill her, she would have to be ready. She would watch for any chance to escape, any moment when they might let their guard down. She would fight back, even if it seemed hopeless. The next morning came too soon. Mary Catherine woke up to the sound of Ezra calling her name from outside the barn. "Mary Catherine, time to get ready for our trip to town?" She climbed down from the loft on shaking legs, trying to look like an innocent girl who was excited about meeting a new family. But inside, she was preparing for the fight of her life. Minerva had laid out Mary Catherine's cleanest dress and told her to wash her face and hands at the pump. "We want you to make a good impression," she said with that same fake smile, while Mary Catherine was getting ready. She saw Ezra and Caleb loading supplies into their saddlebags. She caught glimpses of rope, shovels, and other things that made her stomach turn. They weren't packing for a simple trip to town, ready to go. Ezra asked when she came back into the house. Mary Catherine nodded, not trusting her voice. She followed the two men outside where their horses were waiting. There was no horse for her. She would have to ride behind one of them, which meant she would have no chance to escape once they left the homestead. "You can ride with Caleb," Ezra said, pointing to his son's horse. "He's got the gentler animal." As Caleb helped her climb up behind him, Mary Catherine felt the cold metal of the knife he wore at his belt. She memorized its location, wondering if she would ever get a chance to use it. They rode away from the homestead in the gray morning light, heading not toward town but in the opposite direction. Mary Catherine watched the landscape carefully, trying to remember landmarks that might help her find her way back if she managed to escape. But with each mile they traveled, escape seemed less and less likely. They were riding deeper into empty country, away from any hope of help. Behind her, she could hear Ezra's horse following, cutting off any chance of retreat. The morning sun climbed higher as they rode toward what Mary Catherine was sure would be her grave. But she held on to one small hope, that somehow, somewhere, help might come from the most unexpected place. She had no way of knowing that help was already on its way, riding hard across the prairie toward a meeting that would change everything. They had been riding for almost 2 hours when Ezra called for them to stop near a small creek. The water ran clear and cold, between banks lined with thick brush and scattered rocks. It was exactly the kind of isolated place where a person could disappear forever. Mary Catherine's heart pounded as Caleb helped her down from the horse. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stay calm. If she was going to die here, she wouldn't give these monsters the satisfaction of seeing her beg. "Why are we stopping?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Horses need water," Ezra said, but he wasn't looking at the horses. He was scanning the area like he was making sure they were completely alone. "Good place to rest for a few minutes before we head into town." But Mary Catherine knew they were nowhere near town. They had been riding away from it the entire time. Caleb walked over to his horse and started untying something from his saddlebag. When he turned around, Mary Catherine saw the rope in his hands and knew her time was running out. "Funny thing about this creek," Ezra said, walking closer to her. His hand rested on the handle of his pistol. "Lots of travelers stop here to water their horses. Sometimes they run into trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Mary Catherine asked, though she already knew the answer. "Indian raids," Caleb said with a cold smile. "Terrible thing when innocent folks get caught up in that kind of violence." Mary Catherine's mind raced. They were going to kill her and make it look like she had been attacked by Indians, just like they had probably done to all those other travelers, whose belongings were hidden under the barn floor. Ezra's hand moved to his pistol. "Now, Mary Catherine, I want you to understand that this isn't personal. You seem like a nice enough girl, but we can't have you going around telling stories about things you might have seen at our place." "I won't tell anyone anything, Mary," Catherine said desperately. "I'll go far away from here." "You'll never see me again?" "I'm afraid that's not good enough," Ezra replied, drawing his weapon. "You see, we've built ourselves a nice little life out here. Quiet, peaceful, profitable. Can't risk having that disrupted by someone who might have the wrong idea about our business." Caleb moved behind her, rope ready in his hands. "Nothing personal, like my father said. Just business." Mary Catherine closed her eyes and thought about her parents. At least she would see them again soon. She wondered if they would be proud of how brave she was trying to be at the end. Then she heard it dot at first. It was just a low rumble like distant thunder. But thunder didn't come with the sound of hoofbeats. Thunder didn't get louder and closer with each passing second. Ezra and Caleb heard it too. They both froze, looking around with expressions of confusion that quickly turned to fear. "What in the hell, ... Ezra muttered, raising his hand to shade his eyes as he looked toward the sound. The rumble became a roar. The ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. And then, like something out of a nightmare or a miracle, 12 Comanche warriors appeared on the ridge above them. Mary Catherine had never seen anything so terrifying or so beautiful in her life. The warriors sat on their horses like they had been born there, every movement flowing together in perfect harmony. Their faces were painted with bold stripes of red and black. Feathers decorated their long, dark hair. Some carried rifles, others had bows with arrows already notched and ready. All of them looked like they had ridden straight out of the wildest stories she had ever heard about the frontier. For a moment, nobody moved. The Comanche warriors stared down at the 3 people by the creek. Ezra and Caleb stared back, their faces white with fear. Mary Catherine stood between them, hardly daring to breathe. Then the warriors began to move down the slope toward them, their horses picking their way carefully between the rocks. The leader was a man who looked to be in his 40s, with scars on his chest and arms that spoke of many battles. He rode slightly ahead of the others, his dark eyes taking in every detail of the scene below. "Don't move," Ezra whispered to his son. "Don't do anything to make them angry," but it was too late for that. The warriors had already seen Ezra's drawn pistol and Caleb's rope. They had seen Mary Catherine's terrified face and the way the 2 men were positioned around her. It didn't take a genius to figure out what had been about to happen. The leader of the war party raised his hand, and all 12 warriors stopped about 20 feet away from the creek. He said something in his own language, and 2 of the younger warriors rode around to block any escape route Ezra and Caleb might have been thinking about. "What do you want?" Ezra called out, trying to sound braver than he looked. "We're just peaceful travelers here." The Comanche leader studied him for a long moment, then spoke in broken English mixed with hand gestures that Mary Catherine somehow understood even though she had never learned sign language. "You ... lie," the leader said slowly. "We know your place. We know ... what you do." Mary Catherine's heart leaped. Somehow these warriors knew about the Blackwood homestead. They knew what kind of people Ezra and Caleb really were. The leader continued speaking, his words coming slowly, but clearly. "You kill ... travelers, take their things, Barry." In ground, Ezra's face went even whiter. "I don't know what you're talking about. We're just trying to help this girl get to town." "With rope?" one of the younger warriors asked in better English than his leader. "With gun drawn?" This how white man help young woman. Caleb still held the rope in his hands, and now he seemed to realize how bad it looked. He dropped it quickly, but the damage was done. The warriors had seen everything they needed to see. The leader dismounted from his horse and walked closer to Mary Catherine. She wanted to run, but her legs wouldn't move. Everything she had ever heard about Comanche warriors said she should be terrified. But looking into this man's eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected to find. She saw justice. "You," the leader said to Mary Catherine, pointing at her with one scarred hand. "These men ... hurt you." Mary Catherine glanced at Ezra and Caleb, who were both staring at her with expressions of pure hatred. She knew that if she told the truth, there would be no going back. But she also knew that lying wouldn't save her life. The Comanche already knew what the Blackwoods were. "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, they were going to kill me and make it look like Indians did it." A murmur went through the group of warriors. Several of them spoke angrily in their own language. The leader's expression grew darker. "We find burial ground ... at your place," he said to Ezra. "Find things belong to our people. Trading man, missing many moons. You kill him." Ezra's shoulders sagged. The game was up, and he knew it. These warriors had found the graves behind the homestead. They had connected the Blackwoods to the disappearance of one of their own people. "Look," Ezra said, his voice shaking now. "Maybe we can work something out." We've got money hidden back at the house. Gold and silver we've saved up over the years. You can have all of it." The Comanche leader shook his head slowly. "No trade for murder, no trade for evil." He said something in his own language to the other warriors. Several of them dismounted and began walking toward Ezra and Caleb. The two men backed away, but there was nowhere to go. They were surrounded. "Wait," Caleb shouted. "You can't just kill us. We're white men. The army will come looking for us." "Army? Not come?" the leader replied calmly. "Nobody look for men who kill travelers. Nobody miss men who steal from dead." Mary Catherine watched in amazement as justice unfolded before her eyes. For weeks she had lived in fear of these two monsters, believing there was no escape from their evil. She had prayed for help, but never imagined it would come in the form of Comanche warriors seeking vengeance for their own losses. The leader turned back to her. "You ... Not like them," he said. "You ... Victim, like our people." Mary Catherine nodded, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of fear this time, but tears of relief and gratitude. "We know hurt innocent," the leader continued. "You go, find safety." As the Comanche warriors closed in on Ezra and Caleb Blackwood, Mary Catherine realized that sometimes salvation came from the most unexpected places. And sometimes the people everyone called savage were the only ones willing to stand up for what was right. What happened next would stay with Mary Catherine for the rest of her life. The Comanche warriors moved with a purpose that was both terrifying and beautiful to watch. They had spent weeks tracking the Blackwood family, following a trail of clues that led from missing traders to hidden graves. Now they had found the killers red-handed. About to claim another innocent victim, Ezra made one last desperate attempt to save himself. He raised his pistol toward the Comanche leader, but before he could pull the trigger, an arrow whistled through the air and knocked the weapon from his hand. He cried out in pain, clutching his wounded wrist. "Please," Ezra begged, falling to his knees. "We were just trying to survive out here. Times are hard for everyone." The Comanche leader looked down at him with disgust. Survival no excuse for murder, hard times no excuse for evil. Caleb tried to run. He bolted toward the thick brush along the creek, probably hoping to hide until the warriors left. But 3 of the younger Comanche riders were on him before he made it 10 steps. They brought him back and forced him to kneel beside his father. Mary Catherine stood frozen, watching justice unfold before her eyes. Part of her wanted to look away, but another part knew she needed to witness this moment. For weeks, she had lived in terror of these men. She had gone to sleep every night wondering if she would see another sunrise. Now their reign of evil was finally coming to an end. The leader spoke to his warriors in their own language. Mary Catherine couldn't understand the words, but she could hear the anger and sadness in his voice. He was thinking about all the innocent people who had died at the hands of these monsters. He was thinking about families who would never know what happened to their loved ones. The justice that followed was swift. The Comanche had their own laws about murder, and those laws didn't include long trials or second chances for men who killed innocent travelers. Within minutes, Ezra and Caleb Blackwood had paid the ultimate price for years of cruelty and greed. Mary Catherine felt no joy watching their end, but she felt something else, a deep sense that the world had been set right. Again, these men would never hurt another soul. No more families would be torn apart by their evil. When it was over, the leader turned his attention back to Mary Catherine. She was still standing by the creek, shaking from everything she had witnessed. He approached her slowly, his hands empty, and open to show he meant no harm. "You safe now," he said in his careful English. "Bad men ... gone?" Mary Catherine nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." The leader studied her face for a moment, then reached into a small pouch he wore around his neck. He pulled out something that made Mary Catherine gasp. A small beaded amulet in the shape of a bird, beautiful and intricate in a way that spoke of hours of careful work. "My daughter ... this," he said, holding it out to her. "She same age as you when sickness take her. You keep protection From evil spirits. Mary Catherine's hands trembled as she accepted the gift. She had never owned anything so beautiful, and the fact that it came from a father remembering his lost daughter made it even more precious. "Thank you," she said again, clutching the amulet to her chest. "I'll treasure it always." The leader nodded, then gestured toward one of the horses that had belonged to Ezra and Caleb. "You take horse, ride to town. Tell people what happened here." Mary Catherine looked at the animal, a sturdy brown mare that seemed calm despite all the violence it had just witnessed. The idea of riding alone across 20 miles of frontier country was scary, but not nearly as scary as spending another day with the Blackwood family. "Will you tell me your name?" she asked the Comanche leader. "I want to remember the man who saved me." The leader smiled for the first time since she had met him. "I am Running Bear, chief of small band, father of lost daughter, seeker of justice for murdered friend. I'm Mary Catherine Sullivan, and I'll never forget what you did for me today." Running Bear helped her climb onto the horse, showing her how to hold the reins and control the animal. The other warriors gathered around, offering advice in their own language and making sure she had everything she needed for the journey ahead. One of the younger men, who spoke better English than the others, gave her directions to the nearest town. "Follow creek south for 2 miles, then look for big rocks shaped like eagle head. Turn east there and ride straight. You find town before sun goes down." Another warrior handed her a leather bag with dried meat and water for the journey. "You tell people in town," he said. "Tell them Running Bear's band bring justice. Tell them we no enemy of innocent people." Mary Catherine promised she would deliver the message. As she prepared to leave, Running Bear walked over to her horse one final time. "You have strong spirit," he told her. "Most white women your age, they cry and faint when see warriors. You stand brave, speak truth. Your parents ... they raise good daughter." Those words meant more to Mary Catherine than all the gold in the world. She thought about her mother and father, buried so far from home, and felt like they would be proud of how she had faced this terrible trial. The ride to town was the longest 20 miles of Mary Catherine's life, but also the most hopeful. Every step her horse took carried her further away from the nightmare of the past few weeks and closer to a chance at a real future. The sun was setting when she finally saw the lights of the settlement ahead. It was bigger than the tiny place where she had first met the Blackwoods, a real town with a sheriff, a hotel, and people who might actually help her without expecting something evil in return. The story she told created quite a stir. At first, some people didn't want to believe that the respected Blackwood family had been murderers. But when a group of men rode out to investigate, they found everything exactly as Mary Catherine had described. The hidden graves, the stolen belongings, the evidence of years of crime. The sheriff, a kind man named William Porter, took Mary Catherine under his protection while they figured out what to do next. His wife, Helen, gave her clean clothes and a warm bed, the first time Mary Catherine had slept indoors in weeks. "You're safe now, child," Helen Porter told her that first night. "No one will ever hurt you like that again." And she was right. The Porters helped Mary Catherine find work with a family who ran the general store. They were good people who treated her fairly and gave her a chance to build a new life. Within a year, she had saved enough money to rent a small room above the bakery. She met Thomas Mitchell when she was 18. He was a carpenter just like her father had been, and he had the same kind eyes that had made her mother fall in love all those years ago. They married in the little church on Main Street, with half the town in attendance. Mary Catherine lived to be 89 years old. She had 4 children, 12 grandchildren, and more great-grandchildren than she could count. She became known throughout the county as a woman of great courage and wisdom, someone people came to when they needed advice or comfort, but she never forgot Running Bear and his warriors. She kept the beaded amulet he had given her for the rest of her life, wearing it on special occasions and telling the story of how justice came riding out of the prairie. When all hope seemed lost, she also made sure the true story of that day was never forgotten. Whenever people in town talked about Indians as nothing but savage enemies, Mary Catherine would speak up. She would tell them about the Comanche warriors who had saved her life, who had shown more honor and mercy than the white men who had tried to kill her. "Don't judge a person by the color of their skin or the language they speak," she would say. "Judge them by what they do when they think nobody is watching. That's when you see who they really are." And in a time and place where such words were rare, Mary Catherine Sullivan Mitchell made sure that the memory of unexpected kindness would live on long after the people who showed it had returned to the earth.